Okay, so have you ever had that feeling where your brain is just like fried?
Yeah.
Even if you haven't really been like physically active or anything,
Yeah.
your brain is just like, I cannot process one more thing.
Yeah.
Like even just deciding what I want to eat for dinner is like way too much.
Oh, totally.
So if that sounds familiar, you are not alone.
Nope.
And there's this really interesting concept that kind of helps explain why this happens, and it's called decision fatigue.
Yeah, and decision fatigue is basically this idea that, like, as humans, our ability to make good decisions, it kind of gets worse the more decisions we have to make. Like, if
Well,
you think about it, like your phone, right? You keep adding more and more apps. Eventually, it's going to start slowing down.
exactly.
And same thing with our brains. Our mental processing power, it has its limits.
Uh-huh.
And so the more decisions we have to make, the more tired our brain gets and the harder it is to make good decisions.
And today we are diving into a profession where the decision-making load is like seriously intense.
Yeah.
Teach
Oh, yeah.
It's estimated that teachers make like around 1,500 decisions every single day.
Wow.
That puts them in the same like mental strain category as like air traffic controllers.
That's crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah. I mean, that really highlights just how much mental energy and like quick thinking is required of teachers all the time, right?
Yes.
Thinking about, putting together their lesson plans, dealing with all the different personalities in their classroom,
Uh-huh.
figuring out how to meet each student's needs.
Right.
And then on top of that, making these like split-second decisions all the time.
Totally, yes.
It's just constant.
Right.
And, we read this quote from Susan Wettrich, who's a pre-K teacher,
Mhm.
and she was saying how, even before her school day starts, her mind is already going a mile a minute,
Right.
thinking about how she's going to group her students and, what potential problems might pop up during the day.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, teachers have a lot on their plates.
And for you listening, you're someone who likes to get like a really good understanding of important topics without like spending hours and hours and hours on it.
Right.
So this deep dive into decision fatigue in teaching, it's like super relevant for you.
Exactly.
Because it's not just about, understanding what teachers go through,
Uh-huh.
but it's also about like figuring out how to deal with mental exhaustion and making good decisions, which are skills that apply to everyone.
Yeah, no matter what you do in life, you're gonna have to make decisions.
Absolutely.
And knowing how to do that effectively when you're tired, that's like a superpower.
Yes. And so while we'll talk about how decision fatigue affects teachers, we really want to focus on like what can you actually do about it?
Right, because it's one thing to understand the problem, but it's way more helpful to have some tools to actually solve it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's what we're going to dive into today.
Okay, so we keep throwing around this number of 1,500 decisions a day.
Yeah,
It's kind of hard to wrap your head around.
it is. Yeah.
So what are some examples of the types of decisions teachers are making?
Oh gosh, like all sorts of things. Right. I mean, like you said, there's the obvious ones like, okay, what am I going to teach today?
Uh-huh.
How am I going to know if my students are actually learning it?
Right.
But then you've got all these little things that come up throughout the day that teachers have to decide on the spot.
Yes.
It's like, is this whispering going to disrupt the whole class or should I just let it slide?
Uh-huh.
Does this student need a little extra help or are they just goofing off?
Right.
Should I stick to the lesson plan? Or can I tell the kids are bored and I need to switch things up?
Right.
Like it's constant.
And so I think what makes it even more challenging is not just the number of decisions, but the context, right?
Yeah.
They have to make all these decisions with limited time.
Uh-huh.
They're constantly being pulled in different directions by like a million different things.
Yep.
And then they have this huge responsibility for their students' well-being,
Oh,
like both academic and emotional.
that's a lot of pressure.
It is. And all of that mental effort that they're putting in all the time leads to this thing called cognitive load,
Right.
which is basically a fancy way of saying like how much mental effort is your brain using at any given time.
Uh-huh.
And so when your cognitive load gets too high, it's like your brain is overloaded and it becomes way harder to make good decisions.
And it's not like they get a break, right?
No.
They don't really have time to just sit and like recharge their brains throughout the day.
They're constantly on the go.
It's not even necessarily physical tiredness. It's that mental exhaustion.
Yep, that feeling of just hitting a wall.
Right.
And so when that happens, that's when the decision fatigue really sets in.
Uh-huh.
and the quality of the decisions can start to slip.
Right.
They might make more impulsive choices or miss important details or just find it harder to come up with creative solutions to problems.
We've all been there, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where you're just so mentally drained and you say something you wish you could take back.
Like that I'm at the end of my rope moment.
Totally. And for teachers, that could mean, snapping at a student or just not having the patience to deal with a difficult situation.
Right.
Which is totally understandable.
Of course.
But it's not ideal.
No.
And it's not just about how they react in the moment. It can also affect their teaching methods, right?
Yes.
Because when you're mentally exhausted, it's so much easier to just stick with what you know.
Right.
Even if it's not the best way to teach a particular lesson or work with a certain student, trying something new or coming up with a really innovative approach, it just takes way too much energy when you're already running on fumes.
It's like your brain is looking for the path of least resistance, even if it's not the best path.
Right. It's like, just give me the easiest option. I don't have the energy to think about anything else.
And one of the sources mentioned this teacher, Nima Avashia, and she brought up this really interesting point about studies that have been done on parole boards and jurors.
Oh.
And they found that decisions that are made later in the day, they tend to be less favorable.
That's fascinating.
Isn't that interesting?
It is.
So it's like fatigue really does have an impact on our ability to make good judgments.
Yeah.
Especially in those high-stakes situations.
Uh-huh.
And when you think about the fact that teachers are making all these decisions every single day,
Right.
and those decisions affect their students,
Yeah.
it really makes you wonder, how can we support teachers better so they're not constantly dealing with this decision fatigue?
Yeah. Because ultimately, it's not just about the teacher's well-being, right? It's about
Right.
the students, too.
Absolutely.
We want teachers to be able to make the best possible decisions for their students, and that's hard to do when you're mentally exhausted.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about what can be done about this.
Okay, yeah.
Because our sources are full of really practical strategies that teachers can use to manage and hopefully prevent decision fatigue. And one of the biggest ones that kept coming up is prioritizing decisions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It sounds simple, but it's basically about consciously choosing which decisions you're going to put your energy into and which ones you can kind of streamline or even get rid of completely.
Right, not every decision is created equal.
Exactly.
Some decisions have a much bigger impact than others. And so being able to figure out which decisions really matter and which ones you can kind of put on autopilot, that can really help you conserve your mental energy for the important stuff.
And this reminded me of the eat the frog idea.
Oh, yeah.
You know that concept where it's like, if you have to eat a frog, do it first thing in the morning.
Get it over with.
Get it out of the way.
Exactly.
And then the rest of your day is going to feel so much better.
Right.
So it's kind of the same thing with decisions. If you tackle the most important decisions when you have the most mental energy, the rest of the day is going to feel a little bit easier.
Yeah, I like that.
And something else that came up a lot in the sources was the power of routines and systems.
Oh, yeah. Routines are a lifesaver.
Seriously.
Oh, yeah.
Especially for teachers.
Uh-huh.
Because if you can create consistent procedures for things that happen all the time,
Right.
like grading how students come into the classroom, how they leave the classroom, even the basic structure of certain types of lessons, it can really cut down on the number of decisions you have to make every day.
Yeah, because when you have a routine, it's like your brain doesn't have to think about it as much.
Right.
It becomes automatic.
And that frees up your mental energy for other things.
Right. And that's so important for teachers because they're already dealing with so much. Anything you can do to kind of automate some of those smaller decisions can make a huge difference.
Totally. And one of the sources we looked at, the Cult of Pedagogy article,
Yeah.
they talked about how even small personal routines can have a big impact.
Oh, interesting.
Like having a consistent morning routine, picking out your clothes the night before,
Okay.
even just having a go-to healthy lunch that you like.
Okay.
All of that stuff eliminates those little decisions that you have to make throughout the day.
Right, you don't realize how much mental energy you're spending on those tiny little choices until you don't have to make them anymore.
Exactly.
It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
And another strategy that's really effective is actually giving students some decision-making power in the classroom.
Oh, that's interesting.
And there's this great example from Susan Wettrich, who's a pre-K and kindergarten teacher.
Okay.
She started involving her students in decisions about their daily schedule.
Wow.
And not only did that help her, she had fewer decisions to make,
Right.
but it also gave her students a sense of ownership over their learning,
That's awesome.
which is fantastic.
Yeah, like a win-win.
Yeah.
The students get more autonomy and the teacher gets a little bit of a break.
And then another source mentioned Andrew Zimmerman, and his approach is all about making learning relevant to students' lives.
Okay.
And he really tries to connect what he's teaching to his students' interests and their future goals.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps guide a lot of his decisions about the curriculum and the activities he chooses.
Yeah, because if you know what your students are interested in and what they want to do with their lives,
Right.
it's a lot easier to choose materials and activities that are going to be engaging and meaningful for them.
And Candace Vikis talked about how she really took the time to evaluate which teaching practices from the pandemic
Okay.
she wanted to keep and which ones she wanted to let go of.
Mm-hmm.
And by making those conscious decisions, she's actually streamlining her teaching now and preventing a lot of decision fatigue in the future.
That's smart.
And then another big theme that emerged was the importance of collaboration.
Oh, yeah. Collaboration is key,
Like, seriously.
especially when you're feeling overwhelmed.
If teachers can share the decision-making load with their colleagues,
Right.
it can really help prevent that feeling of, like, I'm the only one who has to figure all this out.
Exactly.
And it also gives them fresh perspectives and new ideas that they might not have thought of on their own.
And one of the sources talked about this idea of a scarcity mindset,
Oh, yeah.
where you feel like you're constantly lacking time and energy and resources.
Right.
And collaboration is a really powerful way to combat that
Uh-huh.
because it's like you're not in it alone.
Right.
You have this whole team of people who can support you and help you make those decisions.
And then, of course, we can't forget about self-care.
Oh, yeah. Self-care is not a luxury. It's a necessity,
Seriously.
especially for teachers.
It might sound cliche, but
Yeah.
making time for breaks during the day,
Uh-huh.
doing things you enjoy,
Yes.
getting enough sleep.
Yeah. All of that is so crucial for preventing burnout and decision fatigue.
Because if you're not taking care of yourself, your brain is not going to be able to function at its best.
No way.
And that's when those bad decisions start to happen.
And, even small things can make a big difference.
Right.
Like just taking a few minutes to do some deep breathing exercises between classes or listening to your favorite song on your way home from school.
Uh-huh.
Like little things like that can really help to reset your brain and reduce stress.
And time management is also super important.
Absolutely.
Like learning how to prioritize your tasks,
Uh-huh.
setting realistic deadlines,
Yeah.
and saying no to things that you just don't have time for,
Right. You can't do everything.
and setting boundaries between your work life and your personal life.
Uh-huh.
Like actually disconnecting from email and school stuff when you're not at work,
Yeah.
that gives your brain a chance to actually rest and recharge.
Otherwise, you're just constantly on.
Exactly.
And I know it's hard, but it's so important.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that we talked about earlier was about that YouTube video.
Uh-huh.
And they made this really interesting point about trusting your gut when it comes to those smaller, less important decisions.
Wha-
Because sometimes overthinking can actually be more mentally draining than just going with your first instinct.
Right. If you're constantly second guessing yourself, it's just going to wear you down.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
So for those like smaller decisions, it's okay to just trust your gut and move on.
And the video also talked about the importance of just making a decision and taking action,
Right.
even if you're not 100% sure it's the right decision.
Uh-huh.
Because indecision can actually be really draining too.
Yes, it is.
It's like that feeling of being stuck,
Totally.
and it can really weigh you down.
And then finally, the idea of believing the data,
Oh, yeah.
which basically means using the results of your decisions
Uh-huh.
to inform your future choices.
Right. Like if a particular teaching strategy is working really well for you,
Right.
stick with it.
If something's not working, try something else.
And don't be afraid to adjust your approach as you go along,
Right.
because that's how you learn and grow as a teacher.
So to kind of wrap things up,
Yeah.
decision fatigue, it's a real problem for teachers.
It is.
I mean, we can't ignore that.
No.
But the good news is there are tons of things that teachers can do to cope with it and prevent it from taking over their lives.
Yeah, there are.
And some of these strategies are super simple,
They are.
like starting a consistent morning routine,
Uh-huh.
simplifying your grading process,
Right.
asking for help from your colleagues.
Yeah,
Like these small changes can make a big difference.
absolutely.
So here's a little something to think about.
Okay.
What's one area in your life, whether it's work or your personal life,
Uh-huh.
where you sometimes feel that decision fatigue setting in?
Interesting.
Now think about just one of the strategies we talked about today
Okay.
and try it out.
Cool.
Maybe it's creating a small routine.
Uh-huh.
Maybe it's delegating a task.
Right.
Maybe it's trusting your gut more often.
Yeah.
experiment a little bit, and see if making that one small change frees up some mental space for you.
I like it.
So you can focus on the things that really matter to you.
The things you're actually excited about.
Heck yeah.
Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah,
Having the energy to not just get through the day, but to actually enjoy it.
absolutely.
To be present and engaged and do the things that make you feel alive.
Yes, I love that.
Go out there and try it and let us know how it goes.
Thanks